person was carrying a child.
And you say a person, male or
female? A male.
So I went into our bedroom and she wasn't there, and that was the first time really that the panic hit. And I just ran back into her bedroom, and literally at that point, the curtains, which were closed, just kind of flew open.
Imagine this, a warm spring evening in Portugal. The sun has just set over the Atlantic Ocean, casting long shadows across the whitewashed buildings of Praia da Luz. Inside apartment 5A of the Ocean Club Resort, 3 young children sleep peacefully while their parents enjoy dinner just 82 meters away. By all accounts, it's a perfect vacation night. But in just 90 minutes, this routine evening would transform into one of the most baffling mysteries in criminal history, one that would captivate the world for years to come. It's May 3rd, 2007. The time is 8:30 p.m. Kate and Gerry McCann leave their 3-year-old daughter Madeleine and her twin siblings asleep in their vacation apartment. They join 7 friends, later dubbed the Tapas 7, at a nearby restaurant. The adults can see the apartment block from their table. They've arranged a system of regular checks on their sleeping children. What happens next will spawn countless theories, worldwide searches, international media frenzy, and one of the most expensive police investigations in history. By 10 p.m., Kate McCann would return to the apartment to find an empty bed where her daughter should be sleeping. The bedroom window is open, curtains billowing in the breeze. Madeleine is gone. But it's what allegedly happened between those critical 90 minutes that we're diving into today. Specifically, a reported sighting that would dominate headlines for years before being dramatically debunked. A sighting that would redirect the entire investigation and raise serious questions about witness reliability, investigative focus, and the timeline provided by Madeleine's parents. Have you ever heard of the Jane Tanner sighting before? Let me know in the comments below, because today we're going to dissect every inconsistency, every contradiction, and every shocking revelation about this pivotal moment in the Madeleine McCann case. If you're fascinated by unsolved mysteries with shocking twists, hit subscribe now. This channel dives deep into the details that mainstream coverage often misses, and trust me, this case has plenty of those details. Praia da Luz sits on Portugal's southern Algarve coast, a picturesque fishing village turned tourist haven. In 2007, it was exactly the kind of place British families flocked to for spring getaways, safe, sunny, and relatively affordable. The Ocean Club Resort blended seamlessly into the town's landscape with its whitewashed apartment blocks scattered across manicured grounds. Apartment 5A stood on the corner of 2 intersecting streets, Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva and Rua Dr. Francisco Gentil Martins. A ground-floor unit with both front and rear access, it featured 2 bedrooms, a living area, and a small kitchen. Most critically, it had a patio door that opened onto a small veranda overlooking a public walkway and the resort's swimming pool beyond. From this patio door to the tapas restaurant where the adults dined that evening was exactly 82 meters, roughly the length of a football field. While the restaurant and apartment were within the same resort complex, they weren't directly visible to each other. A wall and some shrubbery partially obscured the line of sight. This geography would later become crucial to understanding the events of that night. Kate and Gerry McCann were both 39-year-old doctors from Leicestershire, England. Kate specialized in general practice, while Gerry was a cardiologist. Their 3-year-old daughter Madeleine was described as a bright, articulate child with distinctive right eye. Her iris contained a unique dark keyhole-shaped pupil dilation called a coloboma. The twins, Sean and Amelie, were just 2 years old. Joining them on this fateful vacation were 7 friends, collectively known as the Tapas 7, David and Fiona Payne, both physicians, Fiona's mother, Diane Webster. Matthew Oldfield and his wife Rachel, also doctors Russell O'Brien and his partner Jane Tanner, a marketing executive most had met through their medical careers, and many had children of similar ages to the McCann children. This wasn't their first vacation together. They were a tight-knit group who trusted each other implicitly. On the evening of May 3rd, the adults had booked a table at the tapas restaurant for 8:30 p.m. With their children asleep in their respective apartments, they arranged a system of regular checks. Every 20-30 minutes, someone would leave the table to peek in on the sleeping children. The McCanns had established a routine. They left their patio door unlocked for these checks. While the front door was locked, the sliding glass door at the rear remained accessible. Kate and Gerry later explained this decision as a matter of convenience and safety. They worried that in case of fire, a locked patio door might trap the children inside. The apartment itself was sparsely furnished with twin beds for the children pushed against the wall in the rear bedroom. A window in this room faced the street, with external shutters that could be rolled down for darkness and security. On that night, according to the McCanns, these shutters were closed but not locked when they left for dinner. Praia da Luz, in early May, experiences sunset around 8:30 p.m. By the time dinner began, twilight was fading into darkness. Street lighting was minimal, just enough to navigate the pathways between buildings. The temperature had cooled to the mid-60s Fahrenheit, with a gentle breeze coming off the Atlantic. Pleasant enough for open windows, but cool enough for light jackets after dark. This serene vacation setting would soon become the epicenter of one of the most intensely scrutinized crime scenes in modern history, with every meter of distance, every minute of timing, and every detail of the apartment layout subjected to forensic analysis and public debate. To understand the controversy surrounding the Jane Tanner sighting, we need to establish a precise timeline of those critical 90 minutes. Every movement, every check, every encounter matters in this case. Let's break down exactly what happened, or what was reported to have happened, between 8:30 p.m. and 10:00 p.m. on May 3, 2007. 8:30 p.m., the McCanns and their friends arrive at the Tapas restaurant. Before leaving apartment 5A, Kate and Gerry had put all three children to bed. Madeleine was wearing pink and white Eeyore pajamas. The twins were in their travel cots in the same bedroom. According to their statements, Gerry closed the bedroom door almost completely, leaving it open just a crack. 8:45 p.m. The group orders drinks and begins their meal. They establish their checking routine for the evening. The McCanns plan to alternate checks on their children. 8:55 p.m. Matthew Oldfield leaves the table to check on his own children in his apartment. On his way back, he listens at the exterior of the McCanns' apartment, but hears nothing concerning. 9:05 p.m. Gerry McCann gets up from the table to perform the first check on his children. He enters apartment 5A through the unlocked patio door at the rear. Walking into the children's bedroom, he notices the door is open wider than he had left it, approximately 45 degrees instead of the 5-degree crack he remembered. This detail would later become significant. Inside the room, Gerry sees all three children sleeping peacefully. He specifically recalls pausing to look at Madeleine, thinking how beautiful she looked, and how lucky he was to be her father. He adjusts the bedroom door back to its nearly closed position and returns to the restaurant. The entire check takes about 5 minutes. 9:10, 9:15 p.m. On his way back to the Tapas restaurant, Gerry encounters another British holidaymaker, Jeremy Jez Wilkins, who is pushing his young son in a stroller to help him fall asleep. The two men stop to chat near the intersection of the two streets outside apartment 5A. They stand talking for approximately 3 to 5 minutes. 9:15 p.m. Jane Tanner leaves the restaurant to check on her daughter. As she walks along Rua Dr. Francisco Gentil Martins toward her apartment, she passes the spot where Gerry and Jez are chatting. According to her later testimony, at this precise moment, she sees a man carrying a child walking across the junction ahead of her, moving away from the area of the McCanns' apartment. The man is described as 5'7" to 5'9", with dark hair, wearing dark clothing. The child appears to be wearing light-colored pajamas and is barefoot. Tanner notes the child seems to be asleep, with arms hanging limply. The man is walking at a normal pace, not running or acting suspiciously. Tanner continues to her apartment, checks on her daughter, and returns to the restaurant without mentioning what she's seen to anyone yet. 9:20 p.m. Jane Tanner returns to the table. She doesn't immediately share her sighting with the group. 9:25, 9:30 p.m. Russell O'Brien, Jane's partner, leaves to check on their daughter, who is unwell with vomiting. He remains in their apartment for some time. 9:30. p.m. Matthew Oldfield volunteers to check on the McCann children while doing his own check. He enters apartment 5A through the unlocked patio door. Unlike Gerry, he doesn't actually enter the children's bedroom. Instead, he stands at the doorway, which he reports is open. The room is dark and quiet. He sees the twins in their travel cots, but cannot see Madeleine's bed from his position at the door. Assuming all is well because he hears no noise, he returns to the restaurant. 9:55 p.m. Kate McCann gets up to perform her check. She walks to apartment 5A and enters through the patio door, as the others had done. 10 p.m. Kate enters the children's bedroom and immediately senses something is wrong. The door is wide open and she feels a breeze. Looking toward Madeleine's bed, she sees it's empty. The bedroom window is open, and the curtains are blowing in the wind. After quickly searching the apartment, Kate runs back to the restaurant in a panic, famously shouting, "They've taken her! They've taken her!" The group immediately begins searching the resort grounds. Resort staff are alerted, and the police are called at approximately 10:15 p.m. Where are you watching from? I'm curious how global this story has become. This case captured attention worldwide, and I wonder if the details I'm sharing are familiar to viewers from different countries, or if this is new information for some of you. Jane Tanner's sighting quickly became the cornerstone of the abduction theory. Within days, it was the primary lead for Portuguese police and dominated media coverage worldwide. But as we examine her testimony in detail, troubling questions emerge that would eventually lead investigators to completely reassess this critical piece of evidence. Let's first establish exactly what Tanner claimed to have seen that night. In her initial statement to Portuguese police on May 4th, just hours after Madeleine's disappearance, Tanner described seeing a man carrying a child while she was walking back to her apartment to check on her daughter. The sighting occurred at approximately 9:15 p.m., a time that placed it just minutes after Gerry McCann had checked on his children and found them sleeping safely. Tanner described the man as approximately 35-40 years old, of medium build and height, 5'7" to 5'9", with dark hair that was longer at the back. He was wearing dark trousers, possibly jeans, and a dark jacket or coat that appeared to be made of a windbreaker-type material. She couldn't recall seeing his face clearly. The child, Tanner stated, was being carried horizontally across the man's arms. She described seeing light-colored or pinkish pajamas with a floral pattern and noted the child appeared to be barefoot. Tanner estimated the child to be about Madeleine's age and size. Most significantly, she reported that the man was walking away from the area of the McCann apartment, heading east along Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva. When asked why she didn't mention this sighting immediately to the group at dinner, Tanner explained that she didn't think it was suspicious at the time. Only after Madeleine was discovered missing did she connect what she had seen to the possibility of abduction. Now let's examine Tanner's position and line of sight. According to her testimony, she was walking along Rua Dr. Francisco Gentil Martins, heading north toward her apartment. As she approached the intersection with Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, she claims to have passed Gerry McCann and Jeremy Wilkins, who were standing on the same side of the street, engaged in conversation. Just as she passed them, she says she observed the man with the child crossing the junction ahead of her, moving from her left to right. The lighting conditions were poor. Street lighting in Praia da Luz was minimal, and it was fully dark by 9:15 p.m. Tanner estimated she was approximately 5 meters 16 feet away from the man when she saw him. She had only a brief glimpse, perhaps 2-3 seconds, as she walked past. Over time, Tanner's testimony evolved in subtle but significant ways. In her initial statement, she was uncertain about some details of the child's clothing. By May 10th, in a follow-up interview, she had become more confident about the pajama description, specifically mentioning a small floral pattern that seemed to match Madeleine's Eeyore pajamas, which did have small flowers on them. During a rogatory interview conducted by British police in April 2008, nearly a year after the disappearance, Tanner's recollection included additional details not mentioned in her earlier statements. She described the man as not walking particularly quickly, not particularly slowly, and added that he didn't look comfortable carrying the child. She also elaborated on her own emotional state, explaining that she was hurrying back to the restaurant and not paying full attention to her surroundings. But the most problematic aspect of Tanner's testimony was the glaring contradiction it presented. Neither Gerry McCann nor Jeremy Wilkins saw her pass by them, nor did they see a man carrying a child crossing the junction just meters away. Wilkins, in his statement to police, was explicit. "I didn't see anyone with a child. I didn't see Jane Tanner. If she walked past, I would have seen her." Gerry McCann similarly had no recollection of Tanner passing by or of seeing anyone matching her description of the man with a child. This contradiction created an immediate problem for investigators. How could three people, Tanner, McCann, and Wilkins, standing within meters of each other, have such dramatically different recollections of the same moment? If Tanner saw a man carrying a child that matched Madeleine's description, how did both men miss seeing this same person? Several explanations were proposed. The street's layout and lighting created blind spots. Reconstructions showed that depending on exactly where Gerry and Jez were standing, their view of the junction might have been partially obstructed. Gerry and Jez were engaged in conversation and simply weren't paying attention to passers-by. Tanner might have passed by at a moment when both men were looking away or at each other. The timing of the events might be slightly off, with Tanner passing by either before or after the two men were talking. None of these explanations fully resolved the contradiction. If the man with the child was an abductor leaving the scene of the crime, his presence just meters from the father of the abducted child created an almost unbelievable coincidence. Yet if Tanner was mistaken or fabricating her account, why would she invent a sighting that could be so easily contradicted by two witnesses? This investigation gets even more puzzling. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss part 2 of this series, where we'll examine how Operation Grange finally resolved this contradiction in 2013, with a revelation that would completely upend the timeline of Madeleine's disappearance. The chance meeting between Gerry McCann and Jeremy "Jez" Wilkins represents a critical juncture in the timeline, one that directly intersects with Jane Tanner's controversial sighting. Understanding exactly what happened during this brief conversation is essential to evaluating the reliability of Tanner's testimony. According to both men's statements, they encountered each other around 9:10–9:15 p.m. on Rua Dr. Francisco Gentil Martins, just outside the McCann's apartment building. Gerry was returning to the tapas restaurant after checking on his children, while Jez was pushing his young son in a stroller, trying to get him to fall asleep, a routine he had established during their vacation. The positioning of this encounter is crucial. Gerry stated that he was walking down the road from his apartment toward the restaurant when he spotted Jez coming up the hill. They stopped to chat near a set of stairs leading up to the apartment complex. Jez positioned his stroller facing uphill, while Gerry stood with his back to the junction where Tanner claimed to have seen the man with the child. Their conversation lasted approximately 3 to 5 minutes, according to both men's estimates. They discussed mundane vacation topics, how their children were sleeping, the resort facilities, and the cool evening temperature. Gerry mentioned that he had just checked on his children and that all was well. Neither man recalled anything unusual or concerning during their chat. In their police statements, both men were unequivocal about one critical detail. Neither saw Jane Tanner walk past them, and neither observed a man carrying a child crossing the junction. This directly contradicts Tanner's account of passing the two men at precisely the moment she spotted the alleged abductor. Jez Wilkins was particularly clear in his statement. "During the time I was talking to Gerry, I didn't see anyone pass by with a child. I was facing in the direction that the person described by Jane would have walked. I think it would have been almost impossible for someone to walk past with a child without me seeing them." Gerry's testimony aligned with this. "I was standing in the road talking to Jez. I didn't see Jane walk past, and I didn't see anyone carrying a child. If Jane saw what she says she saw, I don't understand how I could have missed it." In 2008, Portuguese police attempted a reconstruction of this encounter, but without the participation of the McCanns and their friends, who had returned to the UK. Later, in 2013, as part of Operation Grange, British police conducted a more thorough reconstruction for the BBC Crime Watch programme. This reconstruction revealed several important factors about sightlines and visibility. The street lighting at the junction was dim, creating areas of shadow where a person could potentially pass without being clearly visible. Depending on exactly where Gerry and Jez were positioned, there was a narrow corridor where someone could theoretically pass behind Gerry without being seen by either man. The gentle curve of the road created partial blind spots at certain angles. If Gerry and Jez were engaged in conversation and looking at each other, their peripheral vision might not have registered someone passing quickly and quietly. However, these factors still didn't fully explain how both men could have missed seeing a man carrying a child crossing directly in front of Jez's line of sight, especially given that Jez was facing the junction where this crossing allegedly occurred. Forensic psychologists note that human attention is selective. We often fail to notice things happening right in front of us when our focus is elsewhere. This phenomenon, known as inattentional blindness, has been demonstrated in numerous studies. Could this explain the discrepancy? Perhaps, but it seems unlikely that both men would simultaneously experience this effect for such a potentially notable sight as a man carrying a pajama-clad child at night. What time is it where you're watching? This crime occurred at 10 p.m. local time in Portugal. It's fascinating how a few minutes, even seconds of timing, can completely change the interpretation of events in a case like this. The precise timing of when people were where that night continues to be one of the most contested aspects of the investigation. When Portuguese police arrived at apartment 5A shortly after 10:30 p.m., they encountered a scene that would become one of the most scrutinized crime scenes in modern history. The physical evidence, or lack thereof, would prove just as controversial as the witness testimonies. The focal point of initial attention was the children's bedroom window. Kate McCann had reported finding this window open when she discovered Madeleine missing. According to her statement, the window was fully raised, with the curtains blowing in the breeze. This immediately suggested a possible entry-exit point for an abductor. The window itself was relatively small, approximately 46 to 50 centimeters wide, about 18-20 inches, and situated about 1 meter above ground level on the exterior. It was equipped with aluminum roller shutters typical of Portuguese construction, designed to block out light and provide security. These shutters could only be operated from inside the apartment using a strap mechanism. When officers examined the window and shutters, they made several significant observations. First, there was no damage to either the window frame or the shutters. No tool marks, scratches, or other indications of forced entry were visible. The shutters moved freely on their tracks, suggesting they hadn't been forced from the outside, a difficult task that would likely leave distinctive damage patterns. This presented an immediate problem for the abduction theory. If someone had entered through this window, they would have needed to raise the external shutters from the outside, nearly impossible without causing damage, open the window, which was unlocked but closed according to the McCanns, climb through the narrow opening, and then exit the same way while carrying a sleeping 3-year-old child. Fingerprint analysis of the window yielded another crucial finding. The only identifiable prints on the window belonged to Kate McCann herself. No unknown fingerprints were found on the window, the frame, or the shutters. This absence of forensic evidence further complicated the abduction scenario. If an intruder had manipulated the window and shutters, they would likely have left some trace evidence behind. The apartment's doors presented another avenue of investigation. The front door was locked, according to the McCanns. The rear patio door was unlocked to facilitate the regular checks on the children. This sliding glass door showed no signs of forced entry, and again no unidentified fingerprints were discovered. Inside the apartment, the scene was remarkably undisturbed. Madeleine's bed showed signs that she had been sleeping in it. The sheets were rumpled, and the bedding was pulled back. Her favorite stuffed animal, Cuddle Cat, remained on the bed. The twins continued sleeping soundly in their travel cots, undisturbed by whatever had transpired in the room. This lack of disturbance raised questions among investigators. If an abductor had entered the room, taken Madeleine from her bed, and then escaped either through the window or door, how did they accomplish this without waking the twins? The children's bedroom was small, with the beds in close proximity. Any movement in the room, especially the sound of the window or shutters being operated, would likely have disturbed light sleepers. Portuguese police, led by Inspector Tavares de Almeida, documented these observations in their initial reports. Their conclusion, as stated in internal documents later released, was that The physical evidence at the scene neither confirmed nor refuted an abduction. However, they noted that the lack of forensic evidence and the undisturbed nature of the scene made a forced entry scenario problematic. The official PJ, Policia Judiciaria, report stated, "The analysis of the scene of the crime indicates that an abduction through the bedroom window is highly unlikely, if not physically impossible, without leaving traces or disturbing the shutters, window, or blinds." This assessment led Portuguese authorities to consider alternative explanations, including the possibility that Madeleine had left the apartment on her own, quickly dismissed due to her age and the height of the window, or that she had been removed through the unlocked patio door rather than the window. But what if the window wasn't the entry point at all? This question began to dominate investigative thinking in the days following Madeleine's disappearance. If an abductor had entered through the unlocked patio door, why would they exit through a small window when they could simply leave the way they came in? And if the window wasn't used for entry or exit, why was it open when Kate discovered Madeleine missing? Some investigators proposed that the open window might have been staged to suggest a break-in, a theory that would later contribute to the controversial decision by Portuguese police to name the McCanns as arguidos, formal suspects, in September 2007. This status was eventually lifted in July 2008, when the case was archived due to insufficient evidence. In May 2011, following years of public pressure and advocacy from the McCann family, British Prime Minister David Cameron ordered Scotland Yard to conduct a formal review of the Madeleine McCann case. This initiative, dubbed Operation Grange, would receive unprecedented resources, eventually costing British taxpayers over $11 million and involving dozens of detectives working exclusively on the disappearance. Led by Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, Operation Grange took a methodical approach. Rather than accepting previous conclusions, they returned to the original evidence, re-interviewed key witnesses, and reconstructed the timeline of May 3, 2007. Their mandate was clear: examine the case as if it had happened on British soil, applying modern investigative techniques and fresh perspective. For 2 years, the Operation Grange team worked largely behind the scenes. Then, on October 14, 2013, they collaborated with the BBC's Crime Watch programme to broadcast a comprehensive reconstruction of the night Madeleine disappeared. This 25-minute segment, watched by over 6.7 million viewers, contained what DCI Redwood described as a revelation moment that fundamentally altered the investigation's direction. That revelation centered on Jane Tanner's sighting, the cornerstone of the original abduction theory that had dominated headlines for 6 years. "We're almost certain now that this sighting is not the abductor," Redwood announced during the broadcast, but rather a British father who was carrying his child home from the evening's creche. This bombshell disclosure came after Operation Grange investigators had tracked down and interviewed a British man who had been staying at the Ocean Club during the same period as the McCanns. This man, whose identity has been protected and who became known in media reports as Creche Dad, had collected his 2-year-old daughter from the resort's night childcare facility around 9:15 p.m. on May 3rd. The route from the night creche to his apartment took him directly across the junction where Jane Tanner reported seeing the suspicious man with a child. The timing matched perfectly with Tanner's sighting. Most convincingly, his daughter had been wearing pajamas that closely resembled Tanner's description, light-colored with a floral pattern. When shown photographs of this man carrying his daughter in similar conditions, Tanner herself acknowledged the resemblance to what she had seen that night. The man's build, clothing, and the way he carried his child all aligned with her original description. "We are almost certain that this sighting is not the abductor," Redwood explained. "We have been able to eliminate this person from our inquiries." This revelation had profound implications for the investigation. First, it completely removed what had been considered the earliest evidence of abduction. For 6 years, the Tanner sighting at 9:15 p.m. had established the timeline of Madeleine's disappearance, suggesting she was taken shortly after Gerry's 9:05 p.m. check. With this sighting now explained as an innocent holidaymaker, that timeline collapsed, Second, it resolved the troubling contradiction between Tanner's testimony and the statements of Gerry McCann and Jeremy Wilkins. The man Tanner saw was real, explaining why she was so confident in her sighting, but he was not an abductor. The reason Gerry and Jez didn't notice him might have been timing. He could have passed moments before or after their conversation, or simply the phenomenon of inattentional blindness. Third, and perhaps most significantly, it shifted the focus of the investigation to a later time frame. "We are now able to move the timeline forward," Redwood stated. With the 9:15 p.m. sighting eliminated, attention turned to the period between 9:15 p.m. and 10 p.m. when Kate discovered Madeleine missing. The Crime Watch program presented this revelation not as a failure of the original investigation, but as progress, a clearing away of a false lead that had diverted resources and attention for years. DCI Redwood characterized it as a moment of clarity that allowed investigators to focus on what we believe now to be the most critical time period. This reassessment vindicated Jane Tanner in an unexpected way. She hadn't fabricated her sighting or misremembered it entirely. She had genuinely seen a man carrying a child in pajamas. Her error was in the interpretation of what she had seen, an error compounded by the stress and chaos following Madeleine's disappearance. The identification of Creche Dad also highlighted a critical investigative principle, the importance of eliminating innocent explanations before pursuing more sinister theories. The original Portuguese investigation, operating under intense pressure and media scrutiny, had perhaps too quickly embraced the Tanner sighting as evidence of abduction without exhaustively exploring alternative explanations. Operation Grange's approach, methodically tracking down every person in the vicinity that night, including holidaymakers who had long since returned to their home countries, demonstrated the value of thoroughness over speed in complex investigations. If you're finding this analysis revealing, hit that like button to help others discover this breakdown. Understanding how investigations can be redirected by new evidence is crucial for anyone interested in true crime cases. With Jane Tanner's sighting explained away as an innocent tourist, Operation Grange shifted its focus to another witness account that had received far less attention in the early investigation, the Smith family sighting. At approximately 10 p.m. on May 3, 2007, around the same time Kate McCann was discovering her daughter missing, an Irish family was walking back to their holiday apartment after an evening at a local restaurant. Martin Smith, his wife Mary, and their children were making their way through the narrow streets of Praia da Luz when they encountered a man carrying a small child. The Smith sighting occurred on Rua da Escola Primaria, approximately 500 meters from the Ocean Club resort and heading toward the beach area. This location placed the man walking away from the vicinity of the McCann's apartment and toward the town center. Martin Smith, a retired businessman from Drogheda, Ireland, provided a detailed statement to Portuguese police on May 26, 2007. He described seeing a man carrying a child who appeared to be sleeping. The child's head was resting on the man's shoulder, arms hanging limply by her sides. She was wearing light-colored pajamas and appeared to be around 4 years old. The man was described as white, 35-40 years old, of average height and build, 5'9" to 5'11", with short brown hair. He was wearing beige or light-colored trousers and a dark jacket. Most notably, Smith stated that the man wasn't dressed like a typical tourist and seemed uncomfortable carrying the child. He was walking at a normal pace, but didn't engage with the Smiths as they passed. No acknowledgement, no eye contact. What makes the Smith sighting particularly compelling is how it differs from yet complements Tanner's description. Both witnesses described a man of similar age and build carrying a pajama-clad child who appeared to be sleeping. However, the Smith sighting occurred 45 minutes later and in a different location, suggesting movement away from the resort. Initially, Portuguese investigators gave limited weight to the Smith testimony. The Tanner sighting, occurring closer to the McCann apartment and earlier in the evening, dominated the investigation's focus. The Smith family returned to Ireland, and their account became a footnote in the case. This changed dramatically after Operation Grange's 2013 reassessment. With the Tanner sighting eliminated, the Smith sighting suddenly became the most credible reported sighting of a potential abductor. DCI Redwood emphasized this shift during the Crime Watch broadcast. The sighting by the Smith family takes on much greater significance. This is now the account of primary interest to us. In 2008, following the McCann's return to the UK and the case's archiving in Portugal, the Smith family worked with private investigators hired by the McCanns to create e-fit images of the man they had seen. These computer-generated facial composites remained unused until Operation Grange revived them in 2013, releasing them to the public during the Crime Watch program. The response was immediate and substantial. According to Crime Watch editor Joe Mather, the program generated over 300 calls and emails, with multiple viewers providing the same name for the man in the e-fits. This convergence of independent identifications suggested the images had struck a chord of recognition. Martin Smith later expressed frustration that his family's testimony had been overshadowed by the Tanner sighting for so many years. "We gave evidence the day after we returned to Ireland," he told reporters. "We felt we were doing our civic duty, but for years it seemed no one was interested in what we saw." The timing of the Smith sighting, coinciding almost exactly with Kate McCann's discovery that Madeleine was missing, creates a compelling alternative timeline. If this man was indeed the abductor, it suggests Madeleine was taken much closer to 10 p.m. than the earlier 9:15 p.m. timeframe established by the now discredited Tanner sighting. This later abduction window also aligns better with Matthew Oldfield's 9:30 p.m. check, during which he reported nothing unusual in the apartment, though he didn't visually confirm Madeleine's presence. It suggests the abduction may have occurred in the narrow 30-minute window between Oldfield's check and Kate's discovery. The Madeleine McCann case offers a powerful case study in the psychology of eyewitness testimony. Jane Tanner's sincere yet ultimately incorrect identification highlights crucial limitations in how human memory functions, especially under stressful conditions. Memory doesn't work like a video camera, faithfully recording events for later playback. Instead, it's a reconstructive process. We store fragments of experiences and rebuild them when we try to recall. This reconstruction is vulnerable to distortion at 3 distinct phases: encoding, when we first experience an event; storage, as memories consolidate over time; and retrieval, when we attempt to recall. During the encoding phase, stress significantly impacts what we perceive and remember. When Jane Tanner walked past Gerry McCann and Jeremy Wilkins that night, she wasn't in a heightened state of alertness. She was simply checking on her child. Her attention was divided, and the lighting was poor. These conditions create what memory researchers call estimator variables, factors that limit the quality of information our brains can capture. Several specific factors likely affected Tanner's perception that night. Lighting conditions. The dim street lighting created shadows and reduced visual clarity. Brief exposure. Tanner had only seconds to observe the man and child. Distance. At approximately 5 meters away, details would be difficult to discern clearly. Divided attention. Tanner was focused on her own task of checking her child. Unexpected event. She wasn't looking for anything suspicious at that moment. The storage phase introduces additional complications. In the chaotic hours and days following Madeleine's disappearance, Tanner was exposed to intense questioning, media coverage, and discussions with other witnesses. This exposure creates what psychologists call post-event contamination, new information that becomes incorporated into the original memory. When Tanner learned that Madeleine had been abducted and heard descriptions of her pajamas, these details may have unconsciously influenced her recollection of what she had seen. This isn't fabrication or lying, it's how memory naturally works. Our brains fill gaps with plausible information, especially when that information comes from trusted sources. During the retrieval phase, the way questions are asked can dramatically affect recall. Leading questions like, "Did you notice the floral pattern on the pajamas?" can implant details that become indistinguishable from actual memories. The pressure to provide helpful information to investigators searching for a missing child would have been enormous, potentially pushing Tanner to report greater certainty than she actually felt. The National Research Council's landmark 2014 report, Identifying the Culprit, emphasizes that witness confidence does not reliably predict accuracy. Tanner's growing certainty about details in her later statements, a common psychological phenomenon called memory hardening, doesn't indicate deliberate deception, but rather how memory consolidates around a narrative that makes sense to us. Perhaps most relevant to this case is the concept of unconscious transference, where a person seen in one context is confused with someone seen in another. When Tanner glimpsed a man carrying his daughter from the creche, her brain had no reason to flag this as significant. Only later, when the context changed dramatically with news of Madeleine's disappearance, did this ordinary sighting take on new meaning. The power of suggestion cannot be overstated in witness testimony. Once Portuguese police embraced the abduction theory based on Tanner's account, a feedback loop was created. The more investigators focused on her sighting, the more significant it seemed, reinforcing both Tanner's confidence and the investigative emphasis on her testimony. None of this means Tanner was being dishonest. On the contrary, the psychological evidence suggests she was reporting exactly what she believed she had seen, a belief shaped by the complex interplay of perception, memory, and post-event information. The Jane Tanner sighting didn't just influence the police investigation, it dominated media coverage and shaped public perception of the Madeleine McCann case for 6 critical years. From the moment details of her testimony leaked to the press, the image of a mysterious man carrying a pajama-clad child became the iconic representation of the case. Within days of Madeleine's disappearance, newspapers across Europe published artist sketches based on Tanner's description. These images, showing a faceless figure carrying a child, appeared on front pages, television broadcasts, and posters throughout Portugal and beyond. The Tanner Man, or Bundle Man as he became known, transformed from witness testimony into visual shorthand for the entire case. This media focus created a powerful narrative framework. Madeleine had been taken by a stranger at approximately 9:15 p.m. while her parents dined nearby. This timeline was repeated so frequently across news outlets that it hardened into accepted fact. Alternative theories or contradictory evidence received far less attention, creating what media scholars call a dominant frame that influenced how the public understood the case. The press amplification of the Tanner sighting served multiple purposes. It provided a clear villain, the mysterious abductor. It established a simple timeline that audiences could grasp. And perhaps most importantly, it offered a tangible lead that suggested the case could be solved if only this man could be identified. British tabloids were particularly aggressive in promoting this narrative. Headlines like "Find This Man" and "Maddie, the Only Suspect" accompanied the sketches based on Tanner's description. These publications devoted unprecedented resources to the case, with some newspapers offering rewards exceeding $1 million for information leading to Madeleine's recovery. When Operation Grange revealed in 2013 that the Tanner sighting had been an innocent tourist, media outlets faced a dilemma. The narrative they had promoted for 6 years had collapsed. The pivot was awkward but swift. Headlines shifted to "Maddie Cops, We Got It Wrong" and "New Suspect," as attention moved to the Smith sighting and the EFITs released on Crime Watch. However, this correction received significantly less sustained coverage than the original Tanner sighting had generated. Many casual followers of the case remained unaware that the Bundle Man had been eliminated from the investigation. The image had become so embedded in public consciousness that it persisted even after being officially debunked. This case illustrates the tremendous power media wields in shaping public understanding of complex investigations by selecting which details to emphasize, which experts to quote, and which images to circulate. News outlets don't just report on cases, they actively construct the narratives through which we interpret them. Has this changed your understanding of the case? Let me know in the comments. Many people still associate the Madeleine McCann case with the Tanner sighting, unaware that investigators now consider it completely unrelated to the disappearance. The Jane Tanner sighting represents one of the most consequential witness testimonies in modern criminal history, not for what it revealed, but for how it misdirected an entire investigation. For 6 years, substantial resources, Media attention and investigative focus centered on a man who had nothing to do with Madeleine's disappearance. This case study offers profound lessons about the complexities of witness testimony and the dangers of prematurely committing to a single theory. The legacy of this investigative misstep continues to reverberate. Had Portuguese authorities identified Creche Dad in the initial days of the investigation, a task that would have been straightforward given that he was staying at the same resort, the entire trajectory of the case might have been different. Resources could have been redirected to other leads, including the Smith sighting, which now appears far more relevant to understanding what happened that night. As of 2025, the Madeleine McCann case remains officially unsolved. Operation Grange continues as an active investigation, though with reduced resources compared to its peak years. In June 2020, German prosecutors announced they were investigating a new suspect, Christian Brückner, a convicted sex offender who was in Praia da Luz when Madeleine disappeared. While German authorities have stated they believe Madeleine is dead, they have not yet disclosed the evidence supporting this conclusion or formally charged Brückner with her abduction. The McCanns continue to maintain hope that Madeleine will be found alive. Their non-profit organization, Madeleine's Fund, remains active in raising awareness about their daughter's case and supporting the families of other missing children. Beyond this specific case, the Tanner sighting saga offers broader implications for how we approach criminal investigations. First, it demonstrates the critical importance of exhaustively eliminating innocent explanations before pursuing more sinister theories. The failure to identify Creche Dad early on represents a fundamental investigative oversight. Second, it highlights the dangers of allowing media narratives to drive investigative priorities. The sensationalized coverage of the Tanner sighting created pressure to pursue this lead at the expense of others. Third, it underscores the need for investigators to understand the psychological limitations of eyewitness testimony, particularly when witnesses are under stress or exposed to post-event information. Finally, it reminds us that investigations should remain flexible, willing to reassess and pivot when new evidence emerges. The 6-year delay in correcting the record on the Tanner sighting represents a costly example of investigative inertia. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann continues to haunt the public consciousness, not just because of the tragedy of a missing child, but because it exposes the fragility of our systems for finding truth. It reminds us that even with the best intentions, witnesses can be mistaken. Investigators can follow false leads, and the path to justice can be obscured by the very human limitations we all share. For more in-depth true crime analysis, subscribe to Criminal Instinct and hit the notification bell. Let me know in the comments which aspect of this case you want me to cover next, whether it's the forensic evidence from Apartment 5A, the controversial cadaver dog alerts, or the latest developments with the German investigation.